今天我们对话的 Alan Z 是一位来自亚特兰大的多面艺术家，他的音乐结合了 R&B、流行和说唱的元素，同时在音乐行业建立了自己的影响力，并在社交媒体上吸引了一大批粉丝。
First question is, what does Asian American or Chinese American identity mean to you?
So I think like the Asian American identity means that we're not just bounded by just our nationality, we're bounded by every group of Asian, right? Whether you're Southeast Asian, South Asian, or East Asian. So we share this kind of bond because unfortunately everyone thinks we are all the same. So, but that can also be a good thing where we can actually stand together for different issues and traumas and actually come together to find solutions for all our issues as a community.
Yeah, definitely important to have solidarity, but also not be a monolith.
Yeah, it's the fine line you got to walk.
Yeah. Great. So I'd also love to just hear about your experiences sort of as an Asian American musician. So can you talk a little bit about your musical influences?
So my favorite rapper growing up was Eminem. And other favorites are like people like Michael Jackson, Prince, The Weeknd, Chris Brown, Rakim, Chino XL, Razcast. So I'm like really into like more like nerdy lyrical hip hop. So like I like that kind of stuff, like more underground 90s to 2000s like rap. But I'm also really, obviously because I sing too, like I'm a big fan of like the classics, like people like mentioned like Michael Jackson, and like like Genuine and like authentic R&B type of musicians. And also like I'm also like transitioning into acting, so like I'm a big like film buff as well. So I think for me, like I dove into entertainment was to provide a voice. Like I don't feel like I have the authority to speak for everyone, but I feel like I can speak up for us. If there's like stuff that's going on and no one's addressing it, if you have a platform, you have the visibility to make some change. So I think being an entertainer was something I've always wanted to do because of that.
Definitely. So what experiences growing up inspire you to pursue becoming a rapper, specifically in writing songs related to the Asian American experience?
Well, I think, I started doing music since I was 12, and I didn't really dive into like the Asian, I guess like the AAPI identity until I got older, because I think when I was young, I just wanted to be taken seriously as a musician. I didn't really want it, because I think at that time, like especially if you did address your identity, like it was just labeled corny. Like it wasn't like acceptable to kind of open up about who you are until like recently, right? Like these past few years. So, but in the back of my mind, I was like, I really want to do something for us, because like I would always see these kind of like images and negative portrayals in media, and I'm just like, there's a way to offset this. We just require the other side of representation of how to be perceived and how to be taken seriously and how to be heard. So no matter what, like I was writing about, I always had that in the back of my mind. And then last year I was able to do this album with another co-artist of mine called Face Value, which is about Asian American history. And I think that's like a really proud work of mine, because I put so much like research and history and like knowledge into that, right? It's like a pretty nerdy like concept of like our history and like what we've been through, right? But on wax, like on a record that you can listen to just like on casually. And I think that's something I'm really proud that I was able to accomplish, because like people don't speak about what we've been through, right? Like they'll talk about COVID or whatever, but like they don't know about like our ancestors and what they've been through to get us here.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely in support of just the idea of more representation, more nuanced representation is sort of the key to combating just only negative stereotypical portrayals.
Right.
Great. I'm curious, what did your parents think of you pursuing music and acting as a career? Were they supportive, or did they have other plans for you?
So I think I opened up about like how I wanted to be an entertainer very young, and there was a little pushback in middle school because I said I was going to go to college, which is probably the dumbest thing you can tell an Asian parent. But I think once I went to Emory University in Atlanta, and which is like a pretty good school, and once I went there and I started making like actual connections, and like major labels started hitting me up and like speaking to my parents, they're like, oh, this is a real thing. It's not just like you're in your bedroom making music. So I think like at that point they just started noticing how seriously I was pursuing this path, and all the like the journey that I've been taking, like my parents have followed along with it in terms of like the ups and the downs. And they've seen a lot of really cool stuff happen in my career, so they know that it's like a real thing. So I think my parents are like super supportive of both the music side and the acting side. So I think I'm definitely fortunate in that.
That's great. Good to hear that. Great. Could you talk a little bit about Asian solidarity with other BIPOC communities, especially given that being an Asian rapper can be controversial, given that rap music has roots in Black culture?
I think that, I feel like it's pretty natural for me just because I grew up around like a diverse community, and like sometimes it's as easy as just making a friend like outside of the community and just kind of like getting to know people like outside of like what you may think of them and tropes and stuff like that, right? And just listen to people's like stories and just getting to know each other as human beings, right? I feel like too many times we get stuck in these like boxes and put people in these boxes. And I think really just learn to like love others, right? And listen to what they have to say, and they'll listen to what you have to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Doesn't need to be super complicated.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about what you think related to Asian American images and pop culture? Example from one of our UCA staff, ranging from manga to K-pop, and what that means for perceptions of Asian masculinity.
So I've definitely seen like a boost up, you know, like, I mean, because I grew up like seeing so many terrible images, right, like of like who we're supposed to be. Like, I mean, like, think about back in the 80s when I wasn't born yet, there was like Long Duk Dong, right? It's like super embarrassing and like very, very like dehumanizing, all the way to like the Hangover, which is again very dehumanizing. But now like I feel like there's like this uprise, right? And I think there is like the good side to like anime and K-pop, because like our, I guess like facets of our like identity and culture is like mainstream. But I think what's important is also for us to kind of be in the forefront of that, right? It's like I'm into anime, so like I do press for like anime conventions and stuff like that, and I'm like one of the only Asian people there, and I'm like, yo, this is our stuff. We need to be there. We need to be present and remind people this isn't some white people's stuff. This is our stuff. That stuff comes from Japan, right? Like same thing with like K-pop and like martial arts. Like let's show up for our stuff, right? Like we shouldn't be ashamed of it, because I think like growing up, we probably were just like, oh yeah, I don't want to be a part of that as Asian. It's like, no, this is our stuff. Like non-Asians are like clinging to this, and like I don't want to see our stuff being like misrepresented as like someone else's culture. Like we should be proud of like all this. But and going back to Asian masculinity, I think there's a lot more. I mean, we see a lot more like Asian like sex symbols now, right? Like Henry Golding, like all these dudes that like, and even John Cho, like he's matured into this super nuanced actor. And I love the idea of like a more nuanced like representation, like you had mentioned, right? Like narratives plenitude. Like it's not just one type of Asian dude, right? Or Asian female woman. Like the fact that like we can have someone like Henry Golding or whoever, and then we can, on the other side, we have like Jimmy O Yang, who had like a rom-com with Nina Dobrev. I think that's where it should be, right? It shouldn't just be one type of representation. It should be all of it. So you can be like an Asian nerd, a skater, a gangster, or whatever you want to be. I feel like that's what's important to show who we are as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that answer. I definitely think that it's great to talk about reclaiming Asian culture. Seeing my fair share of cringy non-Asians claiming Asian culture. So I definitely think it's important for us to be in those spaces and be proud of where we come from and what we bring to the table. Awesome. What advice do you have for younger Gen Z creators and how to make their own lane and advocate for the community?
What advice? I think that they're doing a good job, you know, like I feel like all the trauma that I've experienced, like a lot of these younger cats like don't have that. So I think they're walking into the industry with a very like just like very like naive, but in a good way, where they're like they don't have this baggage. So I think they're doing a good job. It's just like, don't let people stop you. Don't listen to unsolicited opinions, and just listen to your heart. Like whatever you feel is right is probably right, like in your intuition. So there's like, I don't know, I feel like I've actually had this conversation like 2 days ago, and I was like, man, like a lot of these artists that are like younger than me, like Gen Z artists who are Asian, like Audrey Nuna and all these people, like they're getting signed, like they're getting big deals. Like for people in my age, like millennials, like we had to go through the brunt of that. Like where you go to a label and then they'll be like, oh, you're everything we want, but you're Asian. Or like, have you ever thought about going to Korea or China? Like we all of us went, like you ask anybody in my age range, we all went to that ringer, right? I feel like a lot of these guys like didn't, or guys and girls like they didn't have to go through that. So it's like they're doing better than we were in terms of that kind of I don't know, that arena, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think about all the time as someone who listens to K-pop, like there are certain artists who were American, but in order to sort of make their start in the music career, they went to the K-pop industry because it was easier entryway for them. But I also love that in like now we have large organizations like 88 Rising and you know Olivia Rodrigo, I think, is like the first Asian American artist to hit like #1 on Billboard charts. So it's amazing that.
I don't know about that. I think Fari's Movement was like one of the first because he had a #1 song with like a G6. So they were like they were like the pioneers of not pioneers but like one of the pioneers of chart topping hits for Asian American artists.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that probably makes more sense.
Yeah.
No, I think it's just she was probably the first name that was like recognized in that way because she was like exploding in popularity. But
she was in the TikTok wave that
Right. Yeah, I'll have to look more into that song now. Great. Well, what are you looking forward to at this year's UCA convention in DC? Like, are there any specific topics that you're looking forward to speaking about with other Asian Americans?
Yeah, I'm always like really interested in like Asian American media and like just I know there's like some Asians that like hate talking about representation, but for me I feel like because we haven't even gotten there, we need to like because people are like, oh, we're so past it. It's like, no, we're not. Do you see how people perceive us? It's like that's the starting point. Once we get past representation, that's the easy part where we have visibility and we have a voice, right? So I like discussing things with like other like Asian Americans about like where we are, right, in terms of media, how we can change that and what we need to move forward. You know what I'm saying? Like whether you're an artist, an actor, or screenwriter, or whatever it is. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Great. Well, we're so looking forward to having you at this year's convention.